name is Bridget Gage-Dixon. The poem is entitled Bitter Harvest. You have slipped off center again, a landslide of nerve and muscle collapsing as you drag them along beside you, painfully plowing the earth. This is the ground you dwell on. However unsteady the land you inhabit now, you have nowhere else to go. So you sow in this soil, a handful here, a fistful there. Your nails break. Your leg, a weary mule, plows a row for what you'll plant. The storm beneath your skin sends bolts of lightning from shin to thigh. You learn to cultivate through thunder, through cyclone, and through light. A body is a farm you bought before birth. You own every acre. There isn't really just one thing. I guess poetry is really the way that I process the world around me. I've always really been drawn to words and language, and I've always wanted to sort of capture little moments, and because I always feel like there's so much meaning in everything that happens, especially in the small moments. So I've felt a gravity in the world and wanted to process that kind of gravity by writing about the tiny moments that occur and to convey their importance. I remember reading a poem by Stanley Kunitz called The Layers, and I thought that he kind of summed it up really well with the line, live in the layers, not on the litter. And I guess that's kind of how I feel about writing poetry. It's kind of a nice way for me anyway to nestle into those layers and to feel completely alive. This particular poem is really about that time in your life when you have to come face to face with your own physical limitations and what the impact that has on you emotionally. It's about confronting your own pain and finding a way to process the way that your body begins to let you down when you become ill. I think that there are many of us, especially when we're young and healthy, we tend to think of ourselves as somewhat invincible, and then sometimes something happens and suddenly we become cognizant of the divide between our spiritual selves and our physical selves. And this poem, at least for me, was about that reckoning and having to navigate that divide between when your body begins to break down, but your spirit is still sort of seeking strength and is feeling strong and wanting to continue to be strong, but is sort of trapped in a body that is not as strong as the spirit is. So it's a very jarring feeling to realize that there exists this kind of great divide between who you are physically and who you are spiritually and emotionally. And the poem is about the process of cultivating that, your spirit while your body is suffering. So this poem is not written in a poetic form at all. The process of writing this poem was similar in some ways to the way that my process always begins. My process usually begins with some line that gets caught in my head, or an image that gets caught in my head. And for this particular poem, the line that got caught in my head was, "I've slipped off center again." I was actually experiencing some major issues, neurological issues that had me hospitalized at the time, and that phrase kept floating through my mind that I've slipped off centered again because I had something called hemiplegia, so paralysis on one side, and somebody had said something, "Oh, it's a really tough road to hoe," and so the combination of the phrase that was in my own head, which was "you slipped off center again," and then somebody saying you had a tough road to hoe, kind of those two things slipped together and I started to have like the whole farm imagery thing and my own slipping off center, and I started to work those together and think about how I could combine those into kind of preserving, which I talked about. I got to thinking about how I was largely kind of intellectually intact, but physically struggling. A combination of the farm imagery and the cliche of, you know, stuck together and in my head, and I got the first draft of the poem. It was through the process of rehab and the physical therapy that added to the imagery of the woods of light. That was really how it physically felt, and I eventually tied it all together to try to process, you know, the whole experience. I think one of the most important things, because for a while I was teaching creative writing on the high school level, and one of the things I used to tell my students all the time was, be true to your own voice. A lot of times people try to write like someone else, which is a good thing to try to do in the beginning when you're trying to find your voice, but always be true to whatever it is that is really interesting to you, whatever inspires you to write. Uh, and then once you find out whatever it is that, you know, is the thing that you want to write about, then make sure that you are using things in your poems. I was taught, and I really believe this, that the concept of no ideas but in things, that there needs to be a specificity of imagery and ideas in your poems, because that people need something to grab onto and feel in your poems, rather than just sort of being very vague and obtuse in the poem. So I really feel strongly about taking people and transporting them from where they are into the world of the poem, so that the feelings that the poet is feeling can be transferred to the actual reader. And I think that that's really an important thing for someone who is going to be writing poems, that they need to be able to immerse their reader in the world of the poem. I think this one's really tough because there's so many different ways to read a poem, and probably as many different ways to read a poem as there are people trying to read poems. And since I've been teaching poetry for 16 years, I think that what we have to do is try to get people to understand that poetry is very much a living, breathing art form. So bringing it to life is probably the most important thing that can be done. And I think the easiest way to bring a poem to life is to read it aloud. The way a poem sounds is so important. The way the words play off of each other, the use of sonic devices like alliteration, consonants, and apro, all of that can really help a person sort of become again immersed in the world of the poem. And I think the first step should be to read the poem aloud and not to try to torture meaning from it. Just let the words play off of each other and be enough for that first reading. I also think it's really important to revisit a poem, because the great poems change meaning slightly every time you read them. I have to say that one of the poets who always was a great inspiration to me from the time that I was a teenager is Anne Sexton. And a poem of hers that I always found particularly exemplary or inspiring to me was the poem Her Kind. And I think one of the reasons that I found this poem so inspiring when I was a teenager, and even to this day, is because the poem influenced me so heavily, because the thing I love about it is its haunting tone. She's able to create, like, largely through the use of anaphora and a sense of incantation as the speaker moves through the poem. I always felt like a sort of kinship with the misfit speaker, wandering through the woods and rearranging the disaligned. There's a vulnerability that's built up in the first two stanzas that is, it's not quite neutralized by the third stanza, but the speaker suddenly gains this amazing amount of power when she proclaims that she isn't afraid to die. And for me, as a sort of misfit teenager, the poem really conveyed the power that language has to help you take ownership of your own identity and make your own vulnerabilities a source of power. And so there was just this amazing sense that in writing things down and proclaiming your own identity and saying, I have been her kind, this incantation that's present in that poem sort of gave me, at least, and I think many, many, obviously, other people, the sense that here in this poem there is this sense that you can proclaim and who you are and take ownership of yourself just through language. Well, I do have a chapbook coming out in the near future from Finishing Line Press. The chapbook is called Breach, and it should be coming out in the next few months, and I'm very excited about that. So I keep an eye on my, I have a writer page on Facebook, and I will be posting about that on there.